Model Test 3, Speaking Section. The speaking section tests your ability to communicate in English in an academic setting. During the test, you will be presented with 6 speaking questions. The questions ask for a response to a single question, a conversation, a talk, or a lecture. You may take notes as you listen, but notes are not graded. You may use your notes to answer the questions. Some of the questions ask for a response to a reading passage and a talk or a lecture. The reading passages and the questions are written, but most of the directions will be spoken. Your speaking will be evaluated on both the fluency of the language and the accuracy of the content. You will have 15 to 20 seconds to prepare and 45 to 60 seconds to respond to each question. Typically, a good response will require all of the response time, but the answer will be complete by the end of the response time. The time for the speaking section is about 20 minutes. A clock on the screen will show you how much time you have to prepare your answer and how much time you have to record it.
Number 1. Listen for a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you have 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to record your answer.
A possession is an object that you own. If you are asked to choose one possession that you prize highly, which one would you choose? Why? What makes this possession especially valuable to you? Use specific reasons and details to explain your choice.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 2. Listen for a question that asks your opinion about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you have 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to record your answer.
Some people enjoy living in a location that has a warm climate all year. Other people like to live in a place where the seasons change. Which type of climate do you prefer, and why? Use specific reasons and examples to support your opinion.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 3. Read a short passage and listen to a talk on the same topic. Then listen for a question about them. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
A new policy for withdrawal from classes at the university has been established. Read the policy in the college catalog, printed on page 310. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to the students discuss the policy with each other.
The difference in this policy from the old policy is now you only have 3 reasons to request a full refund after the first week: illness, death in the family, or military service.
Right, but that about covers it, don't you think?
Not really. In the old policy, you could drop out to help your family. Look, let's say that your mother's sick. She's not dying, but she needs care. Then what? If you drop out to help her, you just lose your tuition.
Oh, I see. So you think that there should be more flexibility?
Yeah, I think every case should be decided on its own merits. This policy is too
narrow?
Too rigid. I think at least some students will have other good reasons to withdraw, and they'll just have to take a partial reimbursement because they won't be able to document their eligibility. I'd like to see a procedure, a way to petition for eligibility. I'd like to see that added to the policy.
The student expresses her opinion of the policy for reimbursement. Report her opinion and explain the reasons that she gives for having that opinion.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 4. Read a short passage and then listen to part of a lecture on the same topic. Then listen for a question about them. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now read the passage about ballads, printed on page 311. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture in a music appreciation class. The professor is talking about the Ballad of Barbara Allen.
There are countless versions of the Ballad of Barbara Allen, and although it probably originated in the British Isles, versions are found not only in the British colonies, but also in many other countries, including Italy and several countries in Scandinavia. In fact, there are almost 100 versions in the United States alone. But the version that I'm going to play for you today is the traditional child ballad, number 84, from the reference English and Scottish Popular Ballads. In it, the narrative tells the story of Barbara Allen and the young man who fell in love with her. After Barbara Allen rejects him, he dies of unrequited love. And the day after his funeral, Barbara Allen dies of regret. They are buried beside each other in the churchyard, and a red rose grows from his grave. A briar grows from her grave. That's a thorny bush. And as they twine around each other, the rose and the thorn, they form a lover's knot. So we see that the lovers who were not united in life are together in death. The music is repetitive, like most ballads, and also important to identifying it as a ballad, the second and the fourth lines of each four-line stanza rhyme.
Define a ballad, and then explain why Barbara Allen can be classified as a ballad.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 5. Listen to a short conversation. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between a student and her friend.
I thought you liked your history class.
I do. I mean, it's a lot of reading and everything, but I enjoy that, even though it takes a lot of time.
So what's the deal?
Okay, last week, Dr. Norman assigned a paper.
Well, I think that's fairly standard for a history class.
Oh, sure, it's on the syllabus, but it isn't very clear what he wants us to do, and he didn't really clarify it when he talked about it in class, so I don't know how to start.
When's the paper due?
At midterm, so I have time, but still, I'd like to get going on it.
Yeah, but like you say, you have time. Just wait until next week and ask about it again in class.
I could, but won't he be insulted? After all, he already explained it once.
Oh, I don't think he'd mind. He'd probably be glad that you want to do it correctly.
I don't know. Maybe he would.
But anyway, if you don't want to do that, you could just make an appointment to talk about your ideas for the paper, to get some direction about the topic. That way, the conversation will just naturally lead into an explanation of how he wants you to do it.
Describe the woman's problem and the 2 suggestions that her friend makes about how to handle it. What do you think the woman should do, and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 6. Listen to part of a lecture. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a general science class. The professor is discussing the way that ultrasound works.
Okay, let's talk about how ultrasound works and how it's used in medical diagnosis. To make a long story short, ultrasound is very similar to the sonar devices we discussed last week. Remember the system that emits ultrasonic pulses and listens for reflected pulses from objects in the ocean? Well, ultrasound is really just another type of sonar. The sound waves used in the ultrasound are created by a crystal that moves rapidly back and forth, creating a sound, but you can't hear it because the frequency is so high. The doctor places the device, the transmitter that sends out the sound waves. The doctor puts that on the surface of the skin so the sound waves are transmitted inside the body. And when this high-frequency sound is directed to a particular area, then the tissue and organs reflect the sound. The patterns of sound that are reflected are processed by a computer, and an image appears on the screen. And that tells the doctor whether there is something unusual there or not. This is very important in the diagnosis of cancer, to know whether a tumor is present, and also as a non-invasive way to monitor the growth of a fetus during pregnancy.
Using the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the kind of information that ultrasound can provide, and then explain the way that ultrasound is used in medical diagnosis.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Model Test 3, Writing Section.
First, read the passage on page 314 and take notes. Now listen to a lecture on the same topic as the passage that you have just read.
There was only a small reference in your textbook to the Sydney Opera House, so let me make a few more remarks about it. Personally, I think it's the masterwork of architecture in the modern period for any number of reasons, but primarily because it's totally unique. I mean, it doesn't really fit into any category. Sure, it's modern, but it isn't really part of that whole international school that was so popular at the time. Although he did take advantage of advances in structural engineering and the newer materials that had replaced masonry in the international style buildings, and yes, even the clean geometric lines that were stripped of the ornamentation of an earlier period, but the Opera House isn't strictly international because it's so imaginative and the shape completely breaks out of the skyscraper mould associated with the international style. So is it an example of organic architecture then? Again, I would say not. True, it has elements of the organic school, which makes sense because Utzon worked under the supervision of Frank Lloyd Wright for a time, and there's no doubt that the design fits into the surrounding environment. It's a ship in the harbour. But then the function that Wright insisted upon didn't dictate the form as much as the aesthetic shape. The purpose of the sails is to please the eye, not to contribute to the function of the spaces inside them. There's the high-tech aspect of the project that pointed the way for architects and engineers to collaborate in the creation of fantastic structures. So in that sense, it's a creature of the computer age and might be considered part of the high-tech revolution among architects. But no, it's a blend of art and architecture, engineering and technology. It's one of the most widely recognised buildings in the world and is still considered one of the most extraordinary and beautiful structures built in the 20th century. I simply cannot categorise it as representative of any one school of architecture. To me, the Sydney Opera House is one of a kind.
Model Test 3. Example answers.
Example answer for independent speaking question 1. A prized possession.
My most prized possession is my good reputation. My grandfather taught me to value it above material things. When I was a child, I was attracted to my grandfather's watch, and he explained that if the watch failed to keep accurate time, he'd get a new watch. Later, I begged to drive my grandfather's car because it was a much better car than my parents had. He let me drive it occasionally, and he always asked me to be careful. He also made me understand that the car could be replaced, but I could never be replaced. And he told me that his most prized possession was his good reputation, and that was why he had good friends and a successful business. I'd like to be like my grandfather someday, so that's why I need to guard my reputation as my most prized possession.
Example answer for independent speaking question 2. Climate.
I've lived in a place with a warm climate all year for most of my life, but one year my family moved to England where the seasons change. I thought it was a beautiful place and I enjoyed the experience, but I was glad to be home again. In the fall, we don't have to rake leaves. In the winter, we don't have to shovel snow. And in the spring, we don't have to drive in the rain. So a warm climate's a lot less work. And I can wear the same clothes all year in a warm climate. But in a place where the seasons change, you can't. I remember putting my coats and heavy clothes away when the weather got warmer in England. Best of all, I'd like to see the sun shine every day. So maybe I'm just used to warm climate. But for now, that's my choice.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 3. Withdrawal from classes.
The woman thinks that the eligibility requirement for 100% refund after the second week of classes should be changed. Right now, to qualify, you have to show documentation of serious illness, injury, death of a family member, or military duty. She points out that there could be a case when a student's family might need help, but the circumstances wouldn't be covered by the policy. She suggests that there should be a way to petition for full reimbursement by explaining the situation, and each case should be decided based on the circumstances, not on such a limited number of possibilities. So Her solution to the problem would be to add the option of petitioning for full refund by explaining the reason for requesting an exception.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 4. Ballads.
A ballad is, and I'm quoting here, a poem that tells a story and is sung to music. Characteristic of most ballads is the rhyming of the second and fourth lines, and usually ballads are part of an oral tradition, which it means that over the years the song's revised as it's passed down from one musician to another. Some popular ballads have been written down and assigned a number in a reference book by child. Now, Barbara Allen is classified as a ballad because it tells a story about lovers who are not united in life but are joined symbolically in death by the rose and the thorn on their graves. The second and fourth lines of the song rhyme, and many versions of it are found around the world. One version is listed in the child reference as number 84. So you see, Barbara Allen is not only a ballad, it's a very popular one.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 5. The assignment.
The woman's problem is that she doesn't understand the assignment in her history class. She knows that she's supposed to write a paper, but she isn't sure what the professor wants her to do. Her friend suggests that she ask about the requirements for the paper in her class next week, but she's concerned that the professor will be offended because he's already explained it once. His other recommendation is to make an appointment to talk about the topic for her paper because during the consultation, she could ask questions. I think the woman should make an appointment to see the professor in his office as soon as possible so she'll have more time to work on the paper after she understands the assignment better. I also think it'd be best to be direct about asking how to complete the requirement because most professors are willing to help students who show an interest in the class.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 6. Ultrasound.
Ultrasound's like sonar because it sends out ultrasonic pulses, and then it picks up the reflections of the pulses. In the case of ultrasound, a crystal creates sound waves at such a high frequency that you can't hear them, but when the device that transmits the waves is placed on some part of your body, it sends the waves inside to the part that's being tested, and the organs reflect the sound waves. So that informs the doctor if you have anything suspicious there. Ultrasound's very useful in locating cancer and other growths, but it's also used in prenatal care to examine the baby in the months before it's born. In fact, it's fairly standard to produce images of babies to check their patterns of growth using ultrasound. So ultrasound's very useful for medical diagnosis because it can provide accurate information without surgery or surgical procedures.
Model Test 4. Speaking section. The speaking section tests your ability to communicate in English in an academic setting. During the test, you will be presented with 6 speaking questions. The questions ask for a response to a single question, a conversation, a talk, or a lecture. You may take notes as you listen, but notes are not graded. You may use your notes to answer the questions. Some of the questions ask for a response to a reading passage and a talk or a lecture. The reading passages and the questions are written, but most of the directions will be spoken. Your speaking will be evaluated on both the fluency of the language and the accuracy of the content. You will have 15 to 20 seconds to prepare and 45 to 60 seconds to respond to each question. Typically, a good response will require all of the response time, but the answer will be complete by the end of the response time. The time for the speaking section is about 20 minutes. A clock on the screen will show you how much time you have to prepare your answer and how much time you have to record it.
Number 1. Listen for a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you have 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to record your answer.
Which city in the world would you like to visit? Use specific reasons and details to explain your choice.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 2. Listen for a question that asks your opinion about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you have 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to record your answer.
Some students prefer to attend a school that provides education for women only or men only. Other students prefer to attend a coeducational school for both women and men. Which environment do you think is better, and why? Use specific reasons and examples to support your opinion.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 3. Read a short passage and listen to a talk on the same topic. Then listen for a question about them. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
A meeting is planned to explain the proposal for a change in the English language requirements for community college. Read the notice in the college newspaper printed on page 357. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to a student who is speaking at the meeting. She is expressing her opinion about the policy for international students.
I think that this is a good policy because sometimes international students don't do well on an English test, but they're still good students in their major field, so they can probably succeed with a lower score on the TOEFL. And besides that, it's a good idea to begin with one credit class instead of a full course load. I mean, studying part-time while finishing the language classes will provide more of a transition into regular courses. Also, after several semesters in the English Language Institute, most international students become impatient. And this opportunity to begin regular classes, it would increase their motivation toward the end of their language program.
The student expresses her opinion of the policy for international students. Report her opinion and explain the reasons that she gives for having that opinion.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 4. Read a short passage and then listen to part of a lecture on the same topic. Then listen for a question about them. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now read the passage about myths and legends printed on page 358. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture in an anthropology class. The professor is talking about the legend of Paul Bunyan.
Paul Bunyan is one of the more popular characters in American legends. A hero among the lumberjacks of the American Northwest, Paul Bunyan had the size, strength, and the frontier spirit of the North American continent that embraced the stories about him. According to legend, Paul Bunyan was a giant of a man who ate 40 bowls of porridge for breakfast and used wagon wheels for the buttons on his shirts. His feet were so large that while he was walking west across Minnesota, his footprints created 10,000 lakes. He's also attributed with the creation of the Grand Canyon, Puget Sound, and the Black Hills. Some of my colleagues who specialize in folklore believe that the legend has a French-Canadian origin. However, they agree with me that the whole idea of the giant fits in well with the expansion of the frontier in both Canada and the United States. The legend was retold and embellished in the logging camps of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Some of the earliest publications are found in the Detroit News-Tribune in 1910.
Using the main points and examples from the reading, explain the differences between myths and legends. Then refer to the lecture to explain why Paul Bunyan would be considered a legend.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 5. Listen to a short conversation. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between a student and her advisor.
So I really like my roommate. I mean, we get along great, and she's a good student. We take a lot of the same classes and we study together, but, well, I have a problem, and I just don't seem to be able to deal with it.
Okay. What's the problem?
You see, she has a boyfriend in Florida, and she calls him on my cell phone.
Then you have a bill for the extra minutes at the end of the month.
Exactly, and I really can't afford it.
Have you talked with her about it?
Not really. I just don't know what to say.
Well, I think you have a couple of options. You can tell her that you can't let her use your cell phone anymore, and you can offer to go with her to buy her own cell phone. That way she'll see that you're trying to help.
That might work, but she'll probably still be upset.
Or another possibility is you could let her use your cell phone if she pays you for the extra minutes that you've had to cover for her, and if she agrees to pay her share of all the bills from now on. Just tell her that you can't afford it.
Describe the woman's problem and the 2 suggestions that her advisor makes about how to handle it. What do you think the woman should do, and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Number 6. Listen to part of a lecture. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a biology class. The professor is discussing the types of habitats for wildlife found in cities.
Although cities have not generally been associated with wildlife, there are many species that have become so much a part of the urban landscape that they are, for the most part, unnoticed neighbors. For example, in New York's Central Park, almost 300 species of birds have been identified. Urban parks certainly provide some of the world's safest and, in many ways, best wildlife habitats. And as the natural habitats shrink, well, these urban parks will become more and more important to the conservation of wildlife, including not only birds, but also freshwater animals and even small mammals. So, as you see, man-made areas are one important type of habitat in cities. But artificial structures in the urban landscape, these can also provide a home for animals that adapt to life in the city. For instance, chimney swifts are birds that originally lived in hollow trees, but now chimney swifts are commonly found in the long brick chimneys in factories or other vertical shafts in tall buildings. Think about it. A city has more chimneys than there are hollow trees in a forest of equal area. Consequently, these birds flock to the city. Another case of adaptation is the urban drainage system, which is usually made up of concrete ditches, and they naturally attract stream and marsh animals. Again, to use New York City as an example, probably 250 species of fish are found in the harbor, many of which make their way into the pools and ponds and ditches in the New York drainage system. In Boston, the Back Bay was actually designed to create habitats and attract marshland wildlife to the city.
Using the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the two general types of habitats for wildlife found in urban areas.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Model Test 4, Writing Section.
First, read the passage on page 361 and take notes. Now listen to a lecture on the same topic as the passage that you have just read.
In North America, the jet stream usually separates cold air from the polar region in the north from warmer air to the south, so it's called the polar jet stream. Okay, when it's cold in the United States, the polar jet stream often dips south into Texas or even as far as Mexico. And when it's hot, the jet stream retreats into Canada. Now think about some of the trips you may have taken across country. Did you notice that the airline schedules factor in the effect of the jet stream on flight times? For example, if you were flying from Los Angeles to New York, the flight would be more than 1 hour shorter than your return trip from New York to Los Angeles. Why would this be so, do you think? Well, because a particularly strong jet stream can provide a strong tailwind that moves the plane along faster as it travels with the wind. But on the way back, the plane will encounter a headwind, and it will have to travel against the wind, so the flight will take longer. And the plane will also consume more fuel when it's traveling against the jet stream, and you'll probably also feel more turbulence. Besides that, the weather for your flight can also be affected by the jet stream because this strong current of air moves weather systems and storms around the world by pushing them forward, just like the tailwind that pushes your plane.
Model Test 4, Example Answers.
Example answer for independent speaking question 1. A city.
If I could visit any city in the world, I'd like to see Rome. because I'm an architecture major, and it'd be exciting to see the structures in the old city, like the Colosseum and the Forum and temples. I'd also want to inspect the arches that define the perimeter of the old city. I think one of them is almost 2,000 years old, but it's still supposed to be quite beautiful and strong. In a book about Rome, I read that the streets in the old city are made of the original cobblestones laid in ancient times. So besides seeing the architecture, it'd be exciting to walk on the stones. I have a good imagination, and I'm sure I could visualize soldiers and philosophers, even if I'm looking at a lot of other tourists.
Example answer for independent speaking question 2. Schools.
I think a coeducational school is a better environment for both men and women because it's more representative of the world that they'll live in after they finish school. In modern society, men and women will compete for employment opportunities, so it's good practice to compete in classes. And men and women need to learn how to interact socially, and a coeducational school provides activities and social events where they can associate with each other in a somewhat supervised environment. So, I think if men and women are separated throughout their school life, it might be harder for them to work together and develop social relationships after they finish school.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 3. English requirements.
The college is considering a change in the TOEFL requirement. It would allow international students who score 5 points below the cutoff score of 80 to take a credit class while they're finishing their English courses in the English Language Institute. The student thinks that the new policy is a good idea because some students have problems taking a test, but they still have the capacity to succeed in their credit classes, especially in their major field. And students who qualify will have an academic advisor, so they'll be more likely to take a class they can handle. So she also suggests that a part-time schedule would give students a smoother transition into a full-time academic schedule, and it would also motivate students who've been in the institute for a long time, and they're getting tired of studying English.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 4. Myths and legends.
Myths are stories from ancient times that offer an explanation for why things happened, and they often have their origin in religion. But legends are stories about more current heroes who really lived, and they represent examples of the best values of their culture. So Paul Bunyan would be considered a legend because there was probably a big lumberjack, and as the stories about him were told, they got more and more exaggerated until he was a giant who used wagon wheels for buttons on his shirt, and he could create lakes with his big footprints. The professor says that this legend was appropriate for Canada and the United States during the westward expansion of these countries because the stories were about recent events, and the territories were so vast, a hero would need to be a giant to represent the best values of such a time and place.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 5. Roommate.
The woman's problem is that she's friends with her roommate, but the roommate's using her cell phone to call a boyfriend long distance, and it's getting expensive, and she can't afford the extra minutes on the bill. Her advisor suggests that she tell her roommate not to use her cell phone anymore, and she could even offer to help buy her roommate a cell phone. Or another idea was that she could ask her roommate to pay for the extra minutes from previous calls, and any future calls. Well, I think the woman should reconsider the friendship because a real friend wouldn't take advantage of her like that. So I don't think the advisor gave her very good advice. In my opinion, the woman should go back to the advisor and ask him to help her find a new roommate in the dorm.
Example answer for integrated speaking question 6. Urban wildlife.
Both man-made areas and artificial structures become habitats for wildlife in cities. One of the most impressive examples of a man-made area is Central Park in New York, which has become a safe haven for hundreds of species of birds, small mammals, and even freshwater animals that live in the streams and lakes. Back Bay in Boston is a marshland environment that was developed to provide habitats for wildlife. Artificial structures allow wildlife to adapt to city living by using a space that has similar advantages to those of a natural habitat. For example, the chimney swift's a small bird that makes its home in hollow trees, but It's adapted itself to the city by nesting in chimneys. And the fish that live in natural harbors often swim into the ditches that connect to urban drainage systems. So even in cities, wildlife can survive and thrive.
Model Test 5, Listening Section.
The listening section tests your ability to understand spoken English that is typical of interactions and academic speech on college campuses. During the test, you will respond to conversations and lectures. This is the long format for the listening section. On the long format, you will respond to 3 conversations and 6 lectures. After each listening passage, you will answer 5 to 6 questions about it. Only 2 conversations and 4 lectures will be graded. The other conversation and lectures are part of an experimental section for future tests. Because you will not know which conversations and lectures will be graded, you must try to do your best on all of them. You will hear each conversation or lecture one time. You may take notes while you listen, but notes are not graded. You may use your notes to answer the questions. Choose the best answer for multiple choice questions. Follow the directions on the page or on the screen for computer-assisted questions. Click on Next and OK to go to the next question. You cannot return to previous questions. You have 25 to 30 minutes to answer all of the questions. A clock on the screen will show you how much time you have to complete your answers for the section. The clock does not count the time you are listening to the conversations and lectures.
Listening 1, Professor's Office.
Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Collins, I'm really sorry. These are my daughters. They're twins. I wouldn't ordinarily bring them to an appointment, but the babysitter didn't show up, and I couldn't leave them. I didn't want to cancel. I hope it's okay.
It's okay. I have 3 kids of my own, and I've been in the same situation.
Thanks. Well, this shouldn't take much of your time. I really just have one question.
All right.
I'm having a problem understanding the difference between declarative memory and procedural memory. I think from my notes that they're both examples of, let me see. I have it down here. Declarative and procedural memory are 2 broad types of memory circuits in long-term memory.
That's right, but you need to distinguish between them.
Exactly.
Okay, well, declarative memory is a memory that links us to a fact, like a name or a date or even an experience.
So when I remember a professor's name when I see him, that's declarative memory?
Yes, at its most basic level it is. But declarative memory also includes problem solving. Like today, when you decided to bring your daughters to my office, you were using declarative memory to access previous experiences and facts that would allow you to make a decision.
Oh, right. I remember your example in class. That makes sense now. You were talking about problem solving by recalling experiences. But wasn't that episodic memory?
Very good. Yes, it's called episodic memory. But declarative memory includes episodic memory, which is the ability to access prior experiences or personal episodes in our life, usually for the purpose of making a decision or solving a problem. So episodic memory is a subcategory of declarative memory, so to speak. And semantic memory is just the storehouse of facts that we have in our memory circuits.
Which is also a subcategory of declarative memory?
Precisely.
Okay, then procedural memory doesn't include facts or experiences.
Not directly, no. Procedural memory refers to skills that we've learned and are now remembering in order to perform the skill without really thinking much about it. Like, for example, riding a bike, or do you play a musical instrument?
Piano, sort of. Not really.
Okay. Well, when you ride a bike then, you aren't thinking about the name of every part of the bike and how to use the handlebars or the pedals, or at least not consciously.
No.
But at some level, you are remembering how to do these things, so you're using your memory.
And that'd be procedural memory.
Yes, it would.
Okay, then. That's why you said that declarative memory can be more rapidly learned, but it can also be more rapidly forgotten. Because a fact can come and go in the memory. But procedural memory takes repetition and practice, so it's harder to unlearn. I'm not saying that very well.
But you have the idea. Often with declarative memory, you're consciously trying to remember, but with procedural memory, you're performing a skill without consciously trying to recall how, without each step in the process.
That's what I mean, but...
Yes?
Well, I was thinking about language when my girls were learning to talk.
Oh, I see where you're going. You want to know whether language learning is declarative or procedural.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I was thinking that maybe it's both, because you have to memorize vocabulary, but eventually it's more like a skill, like riding a bike, because you don't think about each individual word. It's more automatic. Do you see what I mean?
A very good analysis. I think you've got this.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
And if you ever need to ask me a question and it's hard to get in to see me, just drop me an email.
I thought about that, but...
Look, I'm always glad to see you, but I answer a lot of questions like this by email every day. And if it's easier for you, that's fine with me.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
1. Why does the woman go to see her professor? Two. What do semantic memory and episodic memory have in common? Three. When the professor gives the example of riding a bicycle, what kind of memory is he referring to? Four. Listen again to part of the conversation, and then answer the following question.
Do you see what I mean?
A very good analysis. I think you've got this.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
What does the student mean when she says this?
Do you see what I mean?
Five. What does the professor suggest?
Listening to Literature Class.
Listen to part of a discussion in a literature class.
Today, we're continuing our discussion of Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. We left off last session at the point where Gulliver began his fourth voyage as the captain of a merchant ship. As you'll recall, his crew had confined him and cast him ashore on an island. While making his way along a road, he was attacked by a herd of deformed beasts with brown skin and no tails. But suddenly, the attack was interrupted by the appearance of a beautiful horse. And this is where we left off. So what happens next?
Well, another horse comes along, and they appear to be having a conversation. The two horses, I mean. And they keep using the words Yahoo and Houyhnhnm. So Gulliver is able to understand that Yahoo refers to the animals that attacked him, and Houyhnhnm refers to the horses. Then Gulliver goes home with the horses.
And what is Gulliver thinking about while he's observing the Yahoos and the Houyhnhnms?
Oh, this was good. He starts to understand that the only difference between himself and the Yahoos is his clothing. But he's horrified by this. So we see him trying to be more like the horses.
How do you know that he's striving to emulate the Houyhnhnms?
Well, he learns their language so he can communicate with them.
Right. So this brings us to the most important part of the narrative, the comparison between the Yahoos and the Houyhnhnms. First, tell us how the Yahoos are portrayed. What do they eat? How do they look?
Well, I think the author used the word depraved several times. They eat dog and donkey meat and even garbage, and they drink too much. And he says they're filthy and they stink.
So their behavior, the Yahoos' behavior, is neither rational nor moral. Now, take a look at the description of the Yahoos that Gulliver has known in England. Let me refer to the book here. Okay, Gulliver explains that yahoos in England fight wars for religious reasons, that lawyers use reason to argue for the wrong side, that the wealthy live to acquire more luxuries, and that greed makes them ill. By this we assume that he's referring to the rich gourmet diet that causes gout and other health problems among the upper classes. So this is in contrast with the Houyhnhnms, right? How so?
Yes.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that they eat oats, bread, and honey, but not meat, not other animals, and they don't drink.
I think it's important that they don't even understand the concept of a lie. That proves that they have a very innocent nature.
Good point. You're referring to the fact that they failed to grasp how the crew was able to initiate the mutiny that brought Gulliver to their island.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do the Houyhnhnms think about Gulliver? And what does Gulliver conclude about himself?
Well, Gulliver isn't really a Yahoo, and he isn't really a Houyhnhnm either. I'd say he's kind of in the middle, but he's trying to become a Houyhnhnm. When he goes back to England, he's actually afraid of other humans. I mean, Yahoos.
But he can't quite achieve his transformation, can he? Even though his pride motivates him to continue the impossible pursuit of perfection. So what does this all mean?
I think it's like the other chapters. The fourth voyage it's another critique of the weaknesses in human nature.
Then Swift's making the point that although humankind is capable of rational behavior, we seldom choose to exercise it. The very meaning of the word Yahoo in the Houyhnhnm language is evil. So Swift's very satirical then. And when we consider the time period for the book, the early 1700s, we must appreciate the exceptional departure from the literature of the era, which was mostly written to flatter or entertain. Swift used satire to provide the reader with a perspective that's very different from that of other writers in an age of science and reason.
6. What is the discussion mainly about? Seven. What does Gulliver learn about himself? 8. In the discussion, the professor describes the characteristics of the Yahoos. Indicate whether each of the following is one of their characteristics. Click in the correct box for each sentence. Nine. Listen again to part of the discussion and then answer the following question.
But he can't quite achieve his transformation, can he? Even though his pride motivates him to continue the impossible pursuit of perfection. So what does this all mean?
Why does the professor say this?
So what does this all mean?
Ten. According to the professor, what kind of book is Gulliver's Travels? (11) What can we infer about the literature of the period?
Listening 3, Geology Class.
Listen to part of a discussion in a geology class.
The exploitation of minerals involves 5 steps. First, you have to explore and locate the mineral deposits. Then you set up a mining operation. Next, you must refine the raw minerals and transport the refined minerals to the manufacturer.
Excuse me, sorry, I only have 4 steps. Could you...
Oh, sure. That's exploration, mining, refining, transportation, and manufacturing.
Thanks.
So, each of these activities involves costs. There are costs associated with them, and the costs can be economic, but not necessarily so. Mineral exploitation also has environmental costs associated with it. For example, the exploration stage will clearly have a high economic cost because of personnel and technology, but the environmental cost will probably be quite low. Now, why would that be, do you think?
Because you aren't actually disturbing the environment, you're just looking. I mean, after you find a mineral deposit, you don't do anything about it at that stage.
Right, so the environmental cost would be low. But what happens when you use up all the resources that are easy to find? Then what?
Then the costs go up for exploration.
Which costs?
Well, probably both of them. But I can see where the economic cost would increase.
Okay. Let's say, for example, that some areas such as national parks or historic reserves have been off limits to exploration. What'll happen when we use up the minerals outside of these areas? Remember now that these are non-renewable resources that we're looking for.
Then there'll be a lot of pressure, to open up these areas to exploration and exploitation.
Probably so. And that means that there could be a high environmental cost. Any other options?
Find an alternative.
Yes, you're on the right track.
Okay, find an alternative. A substitute, something that'll substitute for the mineral. Maybe something man-made?
Good. That'll involve a different kind of exploration, again with economic costs. I'm talking about basic research here to find synthetics. But let's go on to the other steps and we'll see if we can pull this all together. How about mining? Now, we're looking at high environmental costs because of the destruction of the landscape and the accumulation of waste products that have to be dealt with. Air and water pollution is almost always a problem. Any ideas on refining?
Wouldn't it be the same as mining? You'd have high costs because of labor and equipment, and there'd be problems of waste and pollution, like you said.
True. And in refining, well, that often involves the separation of a small amount of a valuable mineral from a large amount of surrounding rock. So that means that refining also carries the additional cost of cleanup. And don't forget that it's often difficult to get vegetation to grow on piles of waste. In fact, some of it, the waste piles, they can even be dangerous to living creatures, including people, not to mention the appearance of the area. So the environmental costs can be extremely high. Isn't it sad and ironic that so much of the mining and refining must take place in areas of great natural beauty?
So you're saying that both mining and refining have heavy costs, heavy economic and environmental costs?
Right. And in both mining and refining, you'd need transportation to support the movement of supplies, equipment, and personnel. But after the minerals are mined and refined, then transportation becomes even more essential.
And I was just thinking that in addition to the economic costs of the transportation for trucks and fuel and labor and everything, there might be some construction too, if there aren't any roads in or out of the area.
And that would mean?
That would mean that the landscape and even the ecosystem for the plants and animal life could be altered. So that's an environmental cost.
It is indeed. Good point. That leaves us with manufacturing. After we find it, mine it, refine it, and transport it, we still have to manufacture it. What are the costs associated with that? Well, construction again for factories. Then there'd be energy costs, technology, and labor.
So all that's economic. No environmental costs in manufacturing, then?
Well, yes, there are, actually. Pollution's often a costly problem for manufacturing plants.
Oh, right. I was thinking of the natural landscape, and the manufacturing is often positioned near cities to take advantage of the labor pool. But cities have the environmental problems associated with pollution. So every step has both economic and environmental costs, then?
Right.
12. What is this discussion mainly about? (13) According to the professor, what are two problems that can be anticipated when roads are cut into an area for mining? (14) Listen again to part of the discussion and then answer the following question.
And I was just thinking that in addition to the economic costs of the transportation for trucks and fuel and labor and everything, there might be some construction too, if there aren't any roads in or out of the area.
And that would mean...
Why does the professor say this?
And that would mean...
"15. What option is proposed as an alternative when all of the mineral resources in easily accessible locations have been depleted? "16. What does the professor imply about the environmental costs of mineral exploitation? "17. What does the professor want the students to do in this class session?
Listening 4. Professor's Office.
Listen to part of a conversation on campus between a student and a professor.
Hi, I'm Ron Watson. I'm here to apply for the work-study job.
Oh, good. Have you ever had a work-study position?
Not really. To tell the truth, I'm not exactly sure how it works.
Well, it's like this. On work-study, you have regular hours and assigned responsibilities. But if you get everything done, you can study. You can't leave because there may be something else to do later during your hours. But you should always bring your books and... I guess that probably about 25% of the time you should be able to study.
This is even better than I thought. What kind of assignments would I have? I mean, if I get this opportunity.
Clerical mostly, I'm afraid. Nothing too demanding, but it isn't the most interesting work either. Filing, copying, delivering mail, some grading, but only multiple choice tests, and we use a grading machine for that.
Would someone show me how to operate the grading machine? I'm sure I could do it if someone showed me once or twice.
No problem. We have a secretary here in the department, and she'll be the main person you report to. She'd show you how to do everything.
Okay, great.
Now, let's see whether your hours will fit in with the hours we need. Could you work Monday through Thursday from 10 to 2?
That's 16 hours a week?
To start. We may actually want to extend that to Fridays, so if that happens, it'd be 20 hours. You'll notice that the hours include the usual lunch break. That'd let Nancy, she's the secretary, so she could get you started on the work, and then take her lunch from noon to 1 and be back for the last hour of your day, in case you had any questions.
Okay.
Oh, and I should tell you about the phone. While Nancy's gone for lunch, we'll want you to answer the phone.
Sure, I can do that. Will there be any work on the computer? I'm familiar with most of the basic office programs. I used to help my dad in his office when I was in high school. He's a lawyer.
Oh, well, we hadn't planned to include anything like that in the job, but it's a plus.
Sorry to ask, but how does the pay work? Do I get paid for the time I work minus the study time, or...
Oh, no. You get paid for 16 hours a week whether you're working or studying. This is a special program for students.
It seems too good to be true.
Well, you need to have an interview with Nancy. Since you'll be working closely with her, she'll make the final decision.
Okay. Should I make an appointment, or...
No, just go over to her desk and tell her who you are. She's expecting you. We want to get the position filled as soon as possible.
Well, thank you for seeing me. I hope I'll be working here.
Good luck. Oh, yes. Be sure to tell Nancy about the computer experience.
I will.
And let her know I've already interviewed you and I referred you to her.
Thanks again. I really appreciate your taking the time to explain everything to me.
You're welcome.
18. Why does the student go to the professor's office? "19. Listen again to part of the conversation and then answer the following question.
What kind of assignments would I have? I mean, if I get this opportunity.
Clerical mostly, I'm afraid. Nothing too demanding, but it isn't the most interesting work either.
What does the professor mean when she says this?
Clerical mostly, I'm afraid.
(20) What experience does the man have that may be helpful? (21) What is the pay for the work-study position? (22) What can we assume about the meeting?
Listening 5, Music Appreciation Class.
Listen to part of a lecture in a music appreciation class.
As you know, tonight's the concert that I want you to attend, so I'll keep the class short today. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of chamber music, so you'll be prepared to appreciate the music that you hear tonight. The University Quartet's one of the best in the region, so you'll be hearing an excellent example. Anyway, about chamber music. From medieval times through the 18th century, musicians in Europe had basically two options for employment: the church or the nobility. So when they weren't creating pieces for religious occasions and performing at church functions, musicians were playing in the chambers of stately homes. Now, a chamber is the name for a room where guests may be assembled, kind of like a hall. And because of their association with this room, this chamber, the musicians who played for the wealthy patrons came to be known as chamber players. Chamber music's written to be performed by a relatively small group, more than one, but fewer than a dozen musicians. I should tell you that pieces for more than 8 players are unusual, though, and it's very rare to see a conductor. It may surprise you to know that any combination of instruments can be used for chamber music. The strings, woodwinds, and piano are so often associated with chamber music, and they remain the most popular, even today. But chamber music has been written for other instruments as well. Well, the history of chamber music is usually divided into 3 distinct periods. In the classical period, and that extends from the mid-1700s to around 1820, so in the classical period, chamber music, like many other expressions of the arts, it reacted to the extravagant Baroque style by creating new structures, and these structures expressed simplicity, balance, and order. It was the age of the Enlightenment, with the ideals of logic and reason. So this translated into compositions with one melodic line. The line, the melody, it was usually written for the violin, and all other instruments provided an accompaniment. Early chamber music in the classical tradition often included the recorder, the harpsichord, and the viola. Vienna was a hub of activity for chamber music, and 3 composers dominated the artistic scene. Franz Joseph Haydn's generally credited with organizing the string quartet, and he produced more than 80 pieces for it, the quartet. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart also composed chamber music, including not only quartets but also quintets, and trios with clarinet and even piano sonatas. Since the music was relatively simple, many amateurs played for their own enjoyment. This was new, but by then music was being printed and more people had access to it. So music rooms became popular and people played chamber music as a social activity. Well, it was Ludwig von Beethoven who probably bridged between the classical period and the Romantic period. And I say that because his works were longer and perhaps more complex than his predecessors. And I find this amazing since the later quartets were all created when he was totally deaf. In any case, composers and performers were beginning to break free of the formal confines of the classical period. Their works became increasingly more difficult, expressing some of the high emotions of the 19th century, which, as you will recall, the backdrop of that century. The French and the American revolutions, they were defining moments. So Chopin, Liszt, and Wagner wrote very little chamber music because they preferred the emotional power of the full orchestra, or the personal expression in a piano solo. It was also at about this time that Franz Schubert, Johannes Brahms, Felix Mendelssohn, and Antonin Dvorak made their contributions, and they wrote melodic, passionate compositions for chamber players. But now the music was more difficult to play, and the patronage system was declining anyway, so most chamber music moved from the great homes of the wealthy and into the concert halls, which were frequented by a growing middle class. And it was a very creative period for chamber music, and professional chamber groups merged during this time. The composers probably felt a new freedom because they weren't so much pressed to please their patrons and they could explore their art. Well, at the turn of the century, the modern period ushered in an opportunity for even greater experimentation. Painters were bringing Impressionism to the forefront of the artistic consciousness, and this was reflected musically in the work of Claude Debussy and Maurice Ravel. Their chamber music was considered revolutionary. Debussy and Ravel, because, unlike previous composers, their compositions had recurring themes instead of a continuous melody. And there are a number of other composers who wrote chamber music in the modern period, but whether they'll be remembered is, well, a question to be answered by future historians. What we do know is that the modernists gave chamber music new combinations of instruments and arrangements. And as the music became more unexpected, often with unusual tonality, well, it also became even more difficult to play, and that meant that the scores for modern chamber music had to be played by very skilled ensemble musicians. This evening at the concert, the University Quartet will perform one of the classical pieces by Haydn. You'll hear the Quartet in D minor, Opus 76, number 2, third movement. There are 2 violins, 1 cello, and 1 viola. So, that said, I'll see you tonight.
23. What is the main purpose of the lecture? (24) What is the origin of the term chamber music? (25) Which of the following are the key characteristics of chamber music in the classical period? (26) Listen again to part of the lecture and then answer the following question.
Well, it was Ludwig von Beethoven who probably bridged between the classical period and the Romantic period. And I say that because his works were longer and perhaps more complex than his predecessors. And I find this amazing since the later quartets were all created when he was totally deaf.
What does the professor mean when she says this about Beethoven?
And I find this amazing since the later quartets were all created when he was totally deaf.
(27) Why does the professor mention Impressionism? (28) How did the professor organize the lecture?
Listening 6. Botany class.
Listen to part of a discussion in a botany class. The professor is talking about hydroponics.
Although the recent interest in hydroponics may lead you to believe that it's a relatively new idea, the process probably originated in ancient times. In fact, the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon may well have been one of the first successful attempts to grow plants in water, that is, hydroponically. Early agriculture in Pakistan and India, as well as other areas throughout the Middle East, included water crops. And we also have evidence that the Egyptians were growing plants in water along the Nile. And that was without soil. Asia and the South Pacific were prime locations for early hydroponic gardens, and in the Western Hemisphere, we know that the Aztecs had developed an advanced system of water agriculture along the marshlands of Lake Tenochtitlan. in the Central Valley of Mexico, because when the Spanish arrived, they made drawings in their journals of floating islands of trees and vegetation. In other words, hydroponic agriculture. Okay, well, this isn't a history class. It's a botany class, but I think it's important when we're talking about scientific discoveries that we understand how science works. Sometimes we're rediscovering and refining methods that have been used for a very long time, and that's certainly the case of hydroponics. Through the years, it's been called nutriculture, chemiculture, aquaculture, soilless culture, but the current term is hydroponics. And that encompasses the modern science of growing plants without soil by using an inert medium, such as sand, peat, gravel, or even sawdust or styrofoam. Of course, you have to add a solution of nutrients. Clearly, good soil has the nutrients necessary for plant growth, but when plants are grown without soil, all the nutrients must be provided in another way. So, why do you think that we'd go to all of this additional effort to replace soil?
Well, I think the book mentioned something about keeping the growing medium more sterile.
Uh-huh. Soil-borne diseases and pests and even weeds can be virtually eliminated by using a soil alternative.
So I was thinking probably you wouldn't require as much labor to get rid of the pests and weeds.
Good thought. Now tell me what you know about fertilizer and water.
Oh, right. Less fertilizer and water are required per plant since they're constantly reused. And aren't the results more uniform because of the highly controlled conditions?
Right on both counts. But probably the most important advantage is the ability to cultivate a larger number of plants in a limited space. Where would this be important, do you think?
Well, small or isolated environments or very arid climates with limited freshwater supplies, probably.
Or regions with poor soils, for instance, in developing countries where the weather conditions aren't dependable and famine could happen.
Or the area may have a dense population.
So hydroponics is limited to developing regions, then?
I'm not sure about that. Even in highly industrialized nations, populations are growing, and isn't the total acreage and cultivation dropping to accommodate the expansion of urban areas?
Well stated. As agricultural land is sold for development, hydroponics has become a viable option for almost every country in the world. Now, earlier, I said that we're often rediscovering ancient methods in science, but we're also adapting them by using improvements from other scientific research. In the case of hydroponics, there are probably 2 modern discoveries that have supported progress in hydroponics. Okay, first, the development of plastics that allowed growers to abandon the old concrete beds, which were costly to construct and problematic because they leached into the nutrient solution. But plastic beds are cheap, they're light and sterile, an ideal replacement for concrete. And many of the greenhouses themselves are even built of plastic panels. Okay, the other important advancements, the knowledge we've accumulated about plant nutrition. Of course, like I said, good soil has the nutrients necessary for plant growth, but when plants are grown without soil, all the nutrients must be provided in another way. And now we have a much better idea of what we need to use in the solution to obtain the best results. So, all of that said, let's talk about the lab experiment that we set up here. This solution contains potassium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, monocalcium phosphate, and calcium sulfate. Don't try to write down all of that now. You can refer to your lab workbook for the list of substances and the proportions needed for proper plant growth. For now, just look at this diagram. The drawing in your lab workbook should look more or less like this one. As you know, for plants grown in soil, the roots absorb water and nutrients, but they also serve to anchor the plant. That's why the roots of our hydroponic plants aren't placed directly in the water and nutrient solution. We used sterile gravel, held in place by wire mesh, to anchor the plants, and that allowed us to suspend the roots in the tank below. Remember, the tank contains the water and nutrient solution. So, because oxygen's also taken in by the roots, we had to attach an air pump to mix oxygen into the solution. Remember, a constant source of oxygen is one of the major problems with hydroponics tanks of this kind. And you can see the way that the pump was attached to the tank. Okay, it's almost time for our break this morning, so I'd like you to come over to the hydroponics area and examine the experiment close up. I'd also like you to take a closer look at this specimen of nutrient solution. What do you notice about this? Can you draw any conclusions? Today's day 1 for you to record your observations on the chart in your workbook.
29. What is this discussion mainly about? (30) Why does the professor talk about the history of hydroponics? 31. According to the professor, what is the greatest advantage of hydroponics? 32. Listen again to part of the discussion and then answer the following question.
Or regions with poor soils, for instance, in developing countries where the weather conditions aren't dependable and famine could happen.
Or the area may have a dense population.
So hydroponics is limited to developing regions, then?
I'm not sure about that.
Why does the professor say this?
So hydroponics is limited to developing regions, then?
33. Why does the professor suggest that the students refer to their lab workbook? 34. According to the professor, why are roots important to plants?
7. Library.
Listen to part of a conversation between a librarian and a student.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Are you the reference librarian?
Yes. How can I help you?
Well, I'm looking for a book that compares Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and the United States.
Okay. What exactly are you trying to compare?
I'm not quite sure. How about the cost of living?
Oh. Well, cost of living is, it's not very specific. I mean, what aspects of the cost of living do you need to find? Cost of living is a fairly broad topic.
It is?
Well, yes. Do you want this for personal information or is it for a class?
It's for my economics class.
Uh-huh.
With Professor Brooks.
Oh, okay. Well, do you just need numbers or is it a report, a narrative?
Just the numbers. I'm supposed to make a chart. It can be either a pie chart or a bar graph, and I have to have some demographic information, in order to do the chart.
So you want a general comparison. I'm trying to imagine what you'll put on the graph.
Well, I'm not too clear about that. I was thinking I might make several graphs, one for each country with the cost of basic things on it, and then I could compare the graphs.
Was that the assignment? Maybe if you could explain the assignment to me.
Okay. I have it right here, somewhere. Just a minute. Okay, here it is. It says, make a pie chart or a bar graph with at least 4 parts. It should be large enough to share with the class.
That's it?
Uh-huh. But it's for an economics class, and we have to be able to explain it to everyone. So that's why I was going for the cost of living, and my major's international business, so I was interested in comparing several countries.
But the professor really only asked you for one chart.
I guess so. But I'm trying to figure out how to compare those countries on one chart, and it's not that easy.
Okay. Well,
you think I should just do the one chart then?
It's usually better to follow the instructions for an assignment, unless...
Even if it's more than the professor asked for?
It's usually better to check with the professor first, if you want to change the assignment.
Okay, then. I guess I need to choose one country and compare several factors for the one country.
Or, if you want to compare several countries, you probably need to zero in on one factor.
Yeah.
Like the average income for a family of 4, or...
Oh, I see. Maybe I could compare the cost of a home.
Right.
So I could find that in an encyclopedia then.
Well, maybe. But you want current data, and I'm not sure that you'd find demographics on income and home prices in an encyclopedia. Anyway, look, why don't I show you where you can find some reference materials in economics? Then you can browse for a while. Maybe you'll find something that sparks an idea. But if you don't, then just come back to my desk and I'll look with you.
Thanks. That's great.
35. Why does the man approach the librarian? (36) Listen again to part of the conversation and then answer the following question.
It says, make a pie chart or a bar graph with at least 4 parts. It should be large enough to share with the class.
That's it?
Uh-huh.
What does the woman mean when she says this?
That's it?
(37) What does the librarian imply? (38) What example does the librarian give for the assignment? (39) What will the man do with the information?